Welcome to the Tall and Urban podcast by the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. This is Daniel Safarik. This is Season 1, Timber Rising, sponsored by the USDA Forest Service. We're talking with leading experts about mass timber, a way of building with engineered wood products that is gaining traction around the world. Today we're talking to Phil McCormac, Senior Director of Development for Ivanhoe Cambridge in Denver. Phil is overseeing the development of a new mixed-use timber building in Denver's River North Art District, known locally as RINO. Phil, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
So today we want to talk about the developers' incentive to use mass timber in high-rise construction, which is a relatively new concept for a lot of people. And it sounds like your organization has done a fair amount of this. I guess I'd be interested in hearing a top line a little bit about some of your leading projects that you've done recently in mass timber.
Well, Dan, our first foray into the timber world is actually designed and currently permitted and will be commencing construction on or around Q1 2021. We were actually supposed to start construction here in Denver earlier this year, and then obviously the world has changed. And so with it, the uncertainties of that have pushed that project out, but it will be the first mass timber project that Ivanhoe Cambridge has done. We will be developing this project with Hines, who is no stranger to the mass timber world, having completed office projects in Atlanta and Minneapolis. But this will be our first project in Denver's RINO neighborhood.
And this is is it a mixed use or office or residential?
It's office and base level retail, 210,000 square feet, 6 floors.
That's pretty good sized. So what drove the decision to build with timber here for the first time?
I think it was a combination of really some insight passed down by the Caisse de dépôt to Ivanhoe Cambridge, which is the real estate arm of essentially the Canadian pension. And I think there were some decisions made that, with our development fund, we wanted to make sure that we were not only being cutting edge in terms of building technology, but also creating a unique offering in a unique neighborhood. And we felt that the site and the area around this development lent itself to using a more unique, maybe not as widely used construction processes we used in the past. We felt kind of all the pieces and parts came together in terms of technology and sustainability that really, as we started researching this, we felt that mass timber was, potentially an option for us here, even knowing going in after talking with our developer who had prior experience that there would be a premium to using this over a traditional steel and concrete building. That coupled with the city of Denver's desire to unveil their new code, which allowed mass timber to go above 4 floors. Really, all the pieces and parts came together really nicely for us to be able to do this project.
Well, it's a pretty heavy premium. What justifies the premium of that scale based on your cost benefit analysis?
I think, we were really looking at the target tenant for this particular neighborhood in this particular building. And what we were noticing is that, specifically in the Denver market, oil and gas in the past has been replaced with technology companies moving to the Denver area. And there was a universal, kind of desire to get into sustainable construction. I think there's an aesthetic to mass timber that, at least for some of our technology-focused tenants, is a great alternative to, without a better term for it, your dad's oil and gas 1980s building, of which Denver has a pretty large supply. And so we felt, given mass timber's kind of aesthetic quality and throwback and hearken to the brick and timber neighborhood of Lodo. We see this in Deep Ellum in Dallas, and some of the neighborhoods around Austin, and some of these emerging markets where people can get a better rent. This is really something that we see as, future technology that we think a lot of, not just tech tenants, but at least for this particular development, tech tenants would want to be in above those.
Very interesting. Now, obviously, this is not necessarily a construction typology that everyone is familiar with, although certainly the process of building single-family homes is pretty industrialized and does use panelized timber, but heavy or mass-engineered timber is a little bit different. So I'm wondering if you've had any discussions with the contractors about if this has affected the bidding or their interest or ability to match your pro forma.
Well, there's a couple kind of sides to that question that I'll answer, starting with our specific project in Denver and availability. So all of our mass timber on that project comes from Vancouver, British Columbia. It's ironic that us, being Canadian developers, that we're trying to get our own product across the U.S. border and having tariffs and paying those tariffs to build in the United States. It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. So first off, we've noticed we expected pricing to go up. And what we found was really a desire at the beginning of COVID, when we were locking in prices with our mass timber supplier. We find that outside suppliers are wanting to lock in their pricing far in advance. And so if you're willing to stick with one supplier and do a design build concept, I felt like that ended up being our best bet in terms of getting competitive pricing. So we've been able to lock that pricing in, even though we're pretty much on an 8-month delay at this point.
Right, because the stories that I had heard was that the people who are used to doing, let's say like type 4 construction or type 5 construction, where you have a concrete podium and then you have perhaps 4 to 5 stories above that are in more of the stick frame or balloon frame format. When they look at panelized systems that are pre-manufactured and shipped to the site, they kind of don't know what to do with it because they don't see where there's a lot of labor upside for them. I mean, it's definitely it lowers the labor costs pretty significantly, isn't that right?
It does. Well, it increases the labor cost where it's being manufactured, decreases the labor cost on site.
Exactly.
And so, the good news for us is, we employed a development group that had done this a few times before and brought with them their national relationship with the general contractor who had done this system in the past, and were able to find the right folks to install this. But I could see in a lot of ways with the doing most of the complexity and heavy lifting of the construction system in a factory, that when you finally do get it on site, there's a lot of other things out there that are more labor intensive and better profit margin for subcontractors in the local market. And I could see that as a challenge, which is why I think, in the early going, it's important to find a strategic partner, both on the general contracting side and the subcontractor, to do this on a repeat basis if you can, because that ends up being the profit margin is volume.
I guess as a parting question, for other developers who might be interested in taking this on, based on your experience raising this project in Denver, what would you recommend that they do if perhaps they have? I suppose this is your first foray as well, so maybe this isn't speaking from the perspective of having completed such a project, but since you're working with partners who have, I wonder if you have any advice for developers who might be considering doing tall mass timber for the first time?
Well, they're going to revolve around something that I know a lot of companies aren't allowing right now, which is travel. And I would highly recommend that anybody who's interested in doing CLT, a cross-laminated, or a DLT, dowel-laminated project, that if you can find, at least in this kind of challenging time, a local example, and I always stress local because generally you can talk to, not only is it easier to set up a tour, but you can talk to, potentially locally on how it was sourced and how it was built. But I'd recommend touring a building that's complete. And if you don't have one in your city, go to one, go find one. It's absolutely eye-opening to walk the building with an architect and a contractor, and potentially the developer that went through, and just asking questions. And I think what I was able to learn, at least from some folks, our partners who have done these buildings before, that nothing can take the place of actually seeing the completed product. And the second thing I would recommend is, if you can, and travel permits, is I would go and take a look at one of the factories that these large laminated sections are created in, because it'll help inform. And also I would take your contractor with you if you can, but it would help inform to understand what can be done in the field versus what can be done in the factory. That's what I would recommend, is go see your product from its inception to its completion.
That's great advice. Phil McCormac, Ivanhoe Cambridge, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.